I do think that regardless of how much importance and weight and merit you put into aesthetics, you can't entirely divorce yourself from the topic. Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I thought we might have a bit of a dive into aesthetics as they pertain to spirituality and magic. This is going to be a bit of a ramble, more so my musings on this topic rather than anything inherently instructional or meant to teach. I'm also not going to be going into glamour magic in great detail, so if that's what you were expecting from a video like this, or that's what you were searching for, that's not quite what this is going to be, although a lot of what I speak of will pertain to glamour magic, and I'm sure I will get into that a bit, but it's not meant to instruct in that way. I know there are creators and many videos out there in this community on glamour magic. Kellyanne Maddox has great videos on glamour magic, so I would recommend checking those out. This is really just meant to be a think tank or a brainstorm. I'm also very open to different perspectives. It's a very broad-reaching, complex, and nuanced topic with a lot of different facets, so feel free to comment your own experiences, your subjective, lived experiences, and findings and thoughts down below. I would love to have more of a dialogue going on rather than this be a one-sided conversation or lecture or ramble, basically, which is what this kind of is. So getting into it, I really just want to speak to the visual experience, perception, and all of those things as they pertain to magic and their role within magic and how we can cultivate a powerful experience when we tap into and are very mindfully aware of aesthetics and the visual experience. For example, things like color, correspondences in terms of color and shape, how aesthetics affect sacred space and can create sacred space or just energetic space. I think that visual experience is inherently energetic. What it is light that we are perceiving and interpreting. That's essentially energy that we are receiving and making sense of. So inherently, anything visual is energetic, the same as sound, which is a vibration. Those to me are the two senses that perceive energy, that interact with energy. And then we have our other senses like the olfactory senses and taste, which are more chemically based. That's not to say that they don't entail some sort of energetic quality. And then touch, which is going to be, in a way, also energetic because we've got nerves, which are sending electrical impulses throughout our body and our brain. But I do think that the way that we see and hear is highly energetic. It's receiving abstract environmental energy and making sense of it. And if we can play a part in that, I do think there's a lot of power to be found. And I do sometimes think that the idea of aesthetics is grouped in with things that are superficial or lower in terms of importance. They are fluff. There's not much depth to aesthetics and visuals. We have, for example, in recent years, the whole idea of the witchy aesthetic and newer generations of witches coming in who do pay a lot more mind to cultivating and creating a visual experience sometimes, and I guess the stereotype is at the expense of some of the deeper aspects and the learning and the mentally engaging experience and learning that is usually entailed when it comes to witchcraft. However, I think aesthetics have been integral and inextricable from witchcraft for as long as it has existed and as long as spirituality has existed. We have, for example, old schools, mystery schools that relate to color. We assign color to, for example, the chakras. We have the Kabbalah, which is very color and energy oriented. We have, and it wouldn't be a video for me if there wasn't some sort of correlation drawn to something like tarot. I use the Thoth, and I think the Thoth is a great example when it comes to the visual experience and aesthetics being tied in with energy and magic. Crowley did not necessarily intend this deck to be a divination tool, or at least that wasn't supposed to be its primary purpose. We have all of these records and letters of him talking to Lady Frida Harris, and as per the Golden Dawn sort of correspondences, trying to get very specific colors on each card as it relates to the Kabbalah and astrology. All of these things are so integral. We think of signs in astrology, there are inherent color and visual shapes. We have sigils, talismans, all of which are visual, creating sigils and talismans. We create sacred space, for example, to reflect and be somewhere that is sacred and powerful. And without certain shapes and colors and objects, wouldn't have the same feeling. It wouldn't be the same sacred space. It is inherently visual to us. We walk into doctors' offices and think of them as sterile, cold, and brutal because of the fluorescent lighting or the harsh, sharp furniture, the minimalism. All of those sorts of things are so important in creating an experience. We walk out the door each day, adorning our body with clothing, items. We present ourselves in a certain way because we want to be perceived in a certain way, and there we're getting right into the territory of glamour magic. I do think that regardless of how much importance and weight and merit you put into aesthetics, you can't entirely divorce yourself from the topic. You will have to interact with aesthetics in your life if you are a sighted individual, and even if you aren't, a lot of the world does have a visual experience, so you're still going to be connected in some way. You might not care too much about the idea of appearances, but you still have to put on clothes and probably walk out the door or exist in a space that interacts with others at some point, and your appearance is going to be interpreted, perceived in some way. And I think that the more that we cultivate it, it's not necessarily about creating something grand or something expensive or highly detailed or nuanced, but I do think that being aware and having a connected, mindful interaction with aesthetics can only benefit us, or at least to be aware of aesthetics as we interact with them is highly important, especially as magical practitioners, spiritual individuals who find meaning and are, I think, as we are as a community, a bit more introspective when compared to the various communities at large. This would be a community that I think is a little bit more introspective and mindful. At least it's perceived as such, and I think a lot of us care about those topics. And for example, I think aesthetics is sometimes seen as being quite extrospective. That's a word, right? Yes. On the outside, something that is not so important, or is almost the antithesis to these very intrinsic, deep topics and areas of meaning that we connect to in life. But aesthetics is like the iceberg, the part of the iceberg that's visual, that's above the surface, and then the rest is below. But you need that part that's sticking up from the top. And I think it's the part that others meet and greet and understand. It's the first thing that they see, and then they may find out that there's something below the surface. And so we can do quite a bit with our appearance and aesthetics that we create. Those who like to dabble in glamour magic will enchant their look, perhaps have talismans and various things that relate to certain things. You know, we have color. I'm wearing green, for example. This is actually a brighter green, but often associated with feelings of relaxation, of healing, of very natural elements. Although this is not a very natural looking green, it's a little bit more of a vibrant, kind of maybe in that mint zone, at least that's how it's coming off on camera. Things like that. We have a sort of collective unconscious. I know many of us are invested in that sort of topic. So we instinctively, I think, respond to certain shapes and colors as physical human beings in certain ways. And those are almost psychic not psychic as in like, I can read your mind psychic, but psychic in the psyche, are very ingrained. And if we are interweaving what we imagine to be magic and enforcing our will, I believe magic is essentially taking our will, our consciousness, and using it to incite some sort of change, whether that's external or internal. If we are sort of entwining that with how we are perceived and also understanding, for example, our collective unconscious feelings, those inherent instinctive feelings that we have based on certain things, we can create experiences that are more advantageous to us. For example, you dress a certain way for an interview because you hope to get the job, and that's your appearance. If you appear a certain way, you're more likely to get that thing. And if you know how you need to or should or can appear to increase your odds of a certain thing, why not do that? I think that that's something we can do in most settings, or at least we can create an experience that is very much in alignment with what it is we're looking for. You don't want to show up to a yoga retreat, for example, where you're wanting to relax maybe in vibrant red with lots of harsh lines. You might go for something a little bit more neutral or natural with organic shapes and silhouettes, things that foster on an unconscious level feelings of relaxation and natural elements. For example, we have the chakras, and we have rainbows, and we have Kabbalah, all those things that relate to color. We see things like black being associated with darker elements, being sort of apotropaic in its protective qualities. You wear, for example, black as more of a stay away, and it's just naturally how we respond to that color. It's associated with night and the unknown. We attribute that, for example, to certain deities that govern life and death and mystery, because darkness and the color black is associated with those parts of life in terms of what we experience as human beings. And then on the opposite end, when we see either white or those really bright colors, we associate that with the daylight, with things that are fast, things that are visible, that are clear. We have very earthy colors, red, which is very visceral, and something that we know, for example, as I would say maybe on an instinctive level, we associate it with life force or blood. It's something that runs through our veins, and it's powerful. It can be very more of a raw, visceral experience when it comes to red. We have blues, which we might associate with the sky. You know, we think of throat chakra or third eye chakra. We think of the water. We think of intuition. We think of cool things and emotions when we get, I'm trying to think, when we see things like gray, we think of neutral sort of, I guess in my mind at least, I think of like neutrality. I think of something that's a little bit more ambivalent, that has give to it. All of these things matter in our daily lives. I, for one, sometimes like to think about the colors I'm putting on and the mood that that cultivates for myself. What will I begin to feel throughout the day? Or sometimes I'll even journal on my feelings, and if it relates to a color, if I can start to find patterns in the way that I feel based on the colors I wear or surround myself with, or what I choose to put on my body, I can then sort of try to optimize my moods daily, or at least facilitate the moods that I'm looking to have, or the experiences that I'm looking to have. And I think that it can't hurt. I think that, for example, when we create sacred space, we've fallen into this area recently where we want to have deep, meaningful connections and experiences when it comes to spirituality and magic, but that doesn't mean that the visual isn't deep. I think visual things and aesthetics are superficial inherently. That is their shell, but that there's so much underneath that superficial layer that to ignore that is to do aesthetics a disservice, and to do yourself a disservice by not fully trying to understand and utilize what you have at your disposal. It's something that costs no money to think about and interact with aesthetics. It is a little bit abstract, it's more conceptual, but it has very physical, result-oriented effects in that there will be something to show for the aesthetic, energetic, magical practice that you may start to cultivate in your life. For me, it's just something that's so important. It's what makes up, I think, a lot of stereotypes. It's how we create, for example, things like stereotypes for good and bad, things that we associate in our society, perceptions that we have of certain people, items, topics are all associated with something visual. And when we want to shift that as a collective, we have to shift the appearance and the visual nature of that. Some of the biggest, most powerful industries that exist in this world, the ones that, in my opinion, can be the most insidious and corrupt, do play on the visual experience. Things like media, social media, the entertainment industry, fashion, all of which are not inherently wrong, do utilize and exploit the visual experience as it pertains to us. And yes, we may blow it off and say, I'm not affected. I don't interact with these forms of media. I make a conscious choice to distance myself, but it's impossible to not face and fall victim to or be a part of that experience, at least indirectly. And I think to be more mindful and to understand how it affects you rather than to decide and convince yourself that you aren't affected is in some ways ignorant. To say that and decide that you aren't affected, it's impossible. I think we have to be more realistic with those sorts of things, and to try to understand how you are affected is going to create a much more self-aware experience, at least in my opinion. So tapping into all of those things. Of course, these corporations aren't necessarily magical in their intention. This is not witchcraft. It can be something a bit more mundane, but I do think that there's an energetic quality to it. And I think us as magical practitioners can be the sort of champions and warriors to interact mindfully, to rebel or resist very consciously and mindfully, to be the ones at the sort of helm of the ship to steer things in a direction for the better. Those of us who are mindful and can respond or react to visual experiences that we find unsavory in a magical and energetic way through our aesthetics, through the visual experience, we can combat a lot of the harmful visual experiences and aesthetics that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, and we can be more critical and filter what it is that comes through and how it does affect us when we at least admit to ourselves that we and all others are affected by these things. I had some notes here about various communities that are sort of getting the short end of the stick when it comes to aesthetics and visual experiences. Of course, there's an element of privilege. Money means you have more access to cultivate an aesthetic experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, but you do have more wiggle room and options when it comes to that. So finances, being privileged in that aspect. And then we have communities, of course, all of the marginalized communities that are treated poorly, that are what do I have written here? For example, obviously people of color, LGBTQIA plus members, women specifically when we think, for example, of the media we consume and all of the stereotypes that have existed for thousands of years in terms of objectification, of the sort of covetous nature of beauty and youth, of the physical body and how it ought to be or appear. All of these things they perpetuate the status quo. They create a very exclusive, non-inclusive, of course, exclusive is non-inclusive, visual experience where there is definitely power discrepancies in many large ways that I think we as a magical community are already trying to correct. But to lean into and touch upon things like glamour magic and aesthetics and sacred space and the visual energetic experience, we have a lot more power to tap into. And I think taking the time to reflect and sort of take stock of your role and what you have at your disposal to use as a magical practitioner in terms of aesthetics is something that's so empowering. I think it can really open a lot of doors and make you feel like you have a new tool in your arsenal as a magical practitioner, a witch, however you identify. And then, of course, we think of our tarot readers out here, an inherently visual experience in terms of divination, the way that divination, divining answers, seeking answers. It's a form of knowledge. Knowledge is power. And when we use visual means to ascertain answers and interact with knowledge, all the more reason to understand and really give credit to aesthetics when it comes to spirituality. There's so much more I could say on this topic, but I think I'm starting to go in a sort of circuitous loop here. Please chime in down below. This is something that I think I could write more notes on based on just what I've said here today. But I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun and interesting, or don't. And let me know how you're doing. Let me know your thoughts on this. I'm very, very curious. And until next time, bye.